When you're making an independent film without the infrastructure of a major studio, it's crucial that you think about the end at the beginning so that you can feel confident knowing how long it'll take, and therefore how much it'll cost, to bring your project across the finish line. Today, I'm going to show you how I break down the post-pipeline for a feature film into a calendar to give me and the producers a bird's eye view of how long it'll take to get a movie from camera to the film festival, premiere, or major streamer of your choice. I've used this scheduling process over and over and over for major networks, so I promise it works, and after watching, you can even download my template and use it for your next project. So let's dive in. So this is what my post-calendar template looks like before I start. Now, of course, this can be customized to meet your needs for your particular project, but here we have the general checkpoints of post for a feature film. Within these, we have some of the major categories and milestones that we go through. I find that using these milestones is enough for me to catch all the little things that happen in between. As long as I have the dates for these things marked, that sort of anchors me. So as you can see, we've got camera testing and principal photography in the production category. Here we've got all the phases of a cut, landing with picture lock. Then we've got our turnovers, our spotting sessions, our VFX pulls, into color with our color sessions, into score and sound edit, ADR, pre-mix, final mix, and then finally laying back to master and deliver. Now I'll be going into all these steps in more detail in later videos, but I'll also cover the broad strokes of what happens at each point as I'm plotting them on this calendar. Because I want to keep this super general, I'm going to assume sort of an average genre film. We'll say a horror, because there are so many of those. And we'll assume that there are some VFX for cleanup and creature and gore enhancement, but that the majority of the gore, etc., will be captured practically. We'll assume this is an ultra low tier project based on IA union standards, so anything under 3.5 mil. Now, union requirements are different depending on what budget tier you're working with, and all the information you need to know about your project's requirements, you can get it from your producers, your region's union rep, or the latest IATSE budget agreements at the start of a new project. Now, let's kind of go through what this looks like and how the functionality works here. So again, this is a baseline template that I've created based on working across multiple projects. I really like this because it's sort of a waterfall structure. So I always go first and type the show title. So we'll just call this Standard Horror Film, Ultra Low Tier. I've got my starting Monday, and the reason that I do that is because all of these dates here are based off of what I choose. So I am going to choose the starting Monday, and then it's going to populate Monday through Friday in sequential order, week to week, all the way down for as many weeks as I have the schedule built out. Because we're starting at the beginning, before production has even begun, I've included the production weeks in here as well, as you can see. And this goes all the way through to delivery, so it encompasses all of these phases over here. I've already had at this point a post-pipeline call, a workflow call with production, where I've met, our dailies tech, I've met probably our assistant editor, our AD is probably on that call, maybe our transpo captain, and whoever is loading or running DIT and managing the data transfer. So that means I already know these production dates, and so I can plug this stuff in automatically, and then I can just plot the dates from there. Because of the tier we're working on, I'm assuming basically 20 days of production. Now, before that even begins, I know that camera testing has to happen on week 0. Ideally, this happens even further in advance, but realistically on indies, you're lucky if you get it at all. So in that first week, I'm going to make sure that I'm getting camera charts so that we know what our lenses are supposed to look like in their final format, what the crop factor is for dailies when they're creating their dailies for editorial and for on-set review. We're also going to assume that any LUT building for your production LUT has happened at or before week 0. So basically this is a catch-all for everything that happens prior to production. If you want to build more weeks in before that, you can. Totally fine. Now, principal photography is easy. I've already got my milestones called out up here, so I'll just highlight all of that. A lot of times production likes to get started with post simultaneously as production is still ongoing. This saves you time, gets you through things quicker. So in that week 0, I also like to go ahead and onboard my editor and AE. So I'm just going to go ahead and mark that here. And so they're onboarded by the time that production has even started. It doesn't take long to onboard as long as you've already got your bays set up. And if you're working with like an established post house or rental facility where you're four-walling it, all of the tech stuff is already there per the specs that you've sent them. So really just a few days maybe for the editor and AE to get in, load their presets, make sure they have all their assets available. That's really all you need. So if you needed to do this early, the first week of production, that would be fine too. So now that that's happened, we're going to kind of start working our way through the edit. The assembly edit usually takes a week later than production. So I'm going to just go ahead and block all of this out so that we've got this timeline, which is basically production plus a week for the editor and AE to work on the assembly edit. After that, especially for an indie, I typically allow at least 1 week for the editor's cut. This could be 2 weeks. For certain union tiers, they require certain amount of weeks for the editor's cut. So again, just make sure you check with your union rep or your producer prior to project start to know what that is. The assembly cut is basically the editor cutting to script, and then the editor's cut is taking that and then saying, okay, here's how I would make this flow better. Obviously, editors would like a lot more than a week. I used to be one, so I know that feeling, but typically they just don't get much more time than that. So this is their chance to sort of, shoot their shot to the director and be like, here's some cool choices I think you can make. Now, once they've done that, we call the director in. Now, I've got 10 weeks here because that's the DGA required mandatory minimum for how long a director gets to work solo with just the editor with the cut. During that time, it's precious. Per the contract, no one else gets to see it. Sometimes they're nice and let me in and let me see it so I can help manage things along the way and sort of keep the producers at bay and all that jazz. But this is really dedicated time with the director and editor to work and get the director's vision onto the screen. So I've got 10 weeks allotted here. So they spend 10 weeks going through, picking the best takes, trying things out, fixing things that maybe didn't quite work as they had prevised, and then at the end of that, we've now reached producer's cut. There isn't always a producer's cut. In fact, the phases of the cut really depend project to project. I've worked on some projects that were more traditional and they were produced by a studio as an original series, and so we had editor's cut, producer's cut, studio cut, and network cut. So that's 4 phases of cut for each episode. But then again, I've also worked on feature films that were completely self-funded, and for that, the director called all the shots, so there was just a director's cut. Even in those instances, it's good to sort of allot time for the director to send the cut out to people that they trust, but just keep in mind that this is something that changes from project to project. So 2 weeks on top of your director's cut for the producers to weigh in. Assuming that the producer's cut is the last cut, we've now reached picture lock at the end of this week, which means we can start turning over and doing spotting. I'm actually going to just book the same week for all of these things. Really, you're looking at a few hours for each session, so you can really get through all of it. And what is turnover? Turnover is just making sure that those departments have the assets from the editor so that they can begin doing their work on the raw consolidated media. Spotting is basically going through the movie with a particular department and the director and producers and making decisions on what happens with their department. So for VFX, that's going through and making sure everyone's aware where the VFX are, what the VFX needs are. For sound, that's going through and the director saying, this is what I want to hear here, or I really want to make sure the music is shining in this spot, or try using these sound effects to like convey a life outside the apartment, or something like that. So that's what spotting is just going through the movie with that department and the director. We can do sound and music spotting all on this week as well. And then VFX pools, we can probably get started on this week as well. Again, this is a indie, so we're trying to move quickly. Once you get through the VFX spotting session, your AE has everything they need to start making those pools. Either the AE can do it or the online department can do it, but they can get started really early because VFX is one of the things that takes the longest. So you want to make sure that they have their pools and the assets they need as quickly as possible. Now we get into color spotting, which is kind of the same thing, but we're not going to do it on the same week because we want to give online time to conform the project to the raw media before the color spotting happens. This isn't completely necessary. You don't have to have the conformed media in the color bay to spot the movie with the colorist, but I like to do it because just in case there's anything that they want to sort of workshop with you in the spotting session, they've got the raw media, they've got that full dynamic range, and they can start making those decisions with you. So I like to plan that a week later, just so they have time to get that raw media. Colorists will typically do unsupervised color after the spotting session and before the live color session with the director. So we can just go ahead and allot maybe 2 weeks for that. For your final color session, I'm actually going to come back to this after we've got some of the rest of the stuff built out so that I can kind of make sure it's in line relatively with where everything else is happening. The things that take the longest are going to be your score, all of your sound design, as well as your VFX. Funny enough, I don't actually have VFX built in this version of the template, so I'm just going to add that here, and it will be in the template that I make available for download. Again, we're assuming this is sort of a basic horror, and that most of the effects are happening practically, so we don't have to prioritize their timeline to build out our schedule. Instead, we're going to prioritize the timeline of music and sound, and then I'm pretty sure for most of those, I'm assuming that we can accomplish all of the VFX cleanup that we need to in the same amount of time. So what I'll do is I'll first go to score and say, okay, I know that my composer told me they needed at least 4 weeks, so I'm going to give them 4 weeks, and then the dialogue edit is going to happen. It's going to be one of the first stages of this, followed by the sound design and hard effects and Foley. That'll probably all take place probably over, a 2-week period, let's say. And then we'll have ADR take place here, because ADR can happen simultaneously with sound design. Typically, you have a vendor that's managing the dialogue. You have another that you actually have a dialogue editor. You have a sound designer. You have an ADR recordist and a loop group coordinator. And all of these things can kind of happen simultaneously. So I'm going to put the ADR here on the last week of sound design. And then once all of those assets are available, including score, sound now has everything that it needs to do an initial build of the actual sound session. So I'm going to put our premix here. Premix is something that I always like to have sound do when I can, which is basically where, hey, we've got all the sound design and everything, dialogue cleaned, music in for you to listen to, Mr. or Mrs. Director, but it's not mixed. Keep that in mind. But with that said, let's have you go through Frame or whatever review platform we're using and go ahead and call out any weird sound design or things that are really bothering you now, so that when you're in for the final mix session, we've already gotten through like a big chunk of it. So in other words, let's do a notes pass before you're actually here in the room paying for session time. So I'll book our pre-mix there, and I'll book our final mix, as well as our layback, which is just laying back the sound to picture happening on the same week. And then now that I'm seeing all of this, I can go back to my color sessions and say, okay, well, I know that I want that final color grade in the mix stage when it happens. So if my premix is here, that means I have until here to get the color grade completed. So I think just to be safe, I'm going to have my live color session here and here. So that way, by the time the premix is completed, my colorist and online team can deliver picture to sound so that when the director is in on the sound stage with the re-recording artist, they can have the final color that they approved in with the latest and greatest sound. Nothing's distracting them from picture. You don't have any of them saying, hey, well, what happened to the color grade here? Because that stuff is all laid in. Now that we sort of see where everything else is landing relatively, we see where score is landing, we can go ahead and build out our VFX and say, okay, pulls are happening here. That means the builds can start as early as here, and they will go all the way through until we're going to give them 4 weeks, roughly. Now, this can be maneuvered around, obviously. I mean, this isn't a perfect science. You'll want to make sure that the VFX are completed before the director is in for final color, because you will want the colorist to have graded the VFX shots. You can do this a number of different ways. You can have a session after the initial grade is done and before the VFX are in, and have the director approve everything, and then have another session after VFX are dropped in so that the director can see how all of their decisions translated to those VFX shots. Or you can just wait until all the VFX are in and do your session then. So now that takes us to mastering. We're going to assume that layback and final mix happened earlier in the week, so we can actually begin mastering and deliver to QC that same week. Because again, this is an indie and we're trying to do things quickly. So we'll have these happen on the same week as our layback. It'll be delivered to QC. We're going to have it passing QC the next week, which means we can create our HD and UHD masters and we can deliver to where we need to go. Now, of course, QC may not even be a thing that you need to do on your indie movie, because if you don't have acquisition yet or a network telling you that they need a approved QC report to accept your movie, then you don't have to worry about it right now. Maybe you could do it for peace of mind if you want, but it's not as important. It's not an expense you have to pay for at this time. You can also extend the amount of weeks that you have allotted for passing QC. And you can do that by just adding additional columns. If you are interested in getting QC and you don't know how to do that, you can talk to your DI or finishing house. They can tell you how to get those QC reports, and in some cases they can even run them for you. So that's how I build my initial project post calendar for an ultra low tier feature film that I can share with producers, vendors, team members up and down the chain. This post calendar allows you to see the big picture before anyone else and gives you a place to reset back to and adapt from when something unexpected happens. So thanks for following along, and visit the link in the description to download the template from this video. And let me know in the comments what you thought about this video, what other things you'd like to hear about how post works or making indie films in general. And until next time, get out there and prepare for post.